told me I was going to do class, so I went through a bunch of stuff, and I don't know. Malachi's been a book I enjoy. Minor Prophets was fun to me in a lot of ways. But being the ornery, nasty person I am, we're going to start Malachi in Genesis. To get a feeling of the time of Malachi, you really need to get a little history. And so we're going to do a quick history, hopefully in just a couple of minutes or 5 minutes, and then talk about Malachi itself. We're all familiar, Genesis 1, creation, we're created in man's image. I'm not positive of everything that involves, but at least we normally agree we have an eternal soul, we have the ability to choose right and wrong and distinguish that. When you look at the fall in chapter 3, what does Satan appeal to? What is it that made Adam and Eve sin in Genesis 3? You know how to talk up. I'm different to Rick this
I was quoting from 1 John chapter 2, verses 15 through 17.
Yeah. Basically Satan, he didn't tell them to commit murder. He didn't tell them to steal. He just told them to what? He put doubt in their mind. Oh, God didn't say that. If you eat that tree, you're going to be like God. So when you look at sin, one of the things that you find when you get to the 4th chapter where Cain kills Abel, and God begins to talk to Cain, he says in verse 7 of Genesis 4, if you do well, will you not be accepted? If you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you. And notice the next verse, or next part of the verse. But you must rule over it. What does that say about sin?
That we can conquer it?
Yeah, it's overcomable. If you go to 1 Corinthians 10, Paul talks about how that with every temptation, God provides a way of escape. So basically, God tells us we don't have to sin. And yet at the same time, Romans 3, we all sin. So what does that tell us about us? Yeah, we're weak. We don't always control, or we don't always, as he says, take charge to rule over it. We allow it to rule us. In other words, we give in to those desires, we give in to emotion, we give in to all kinds of things. I mean, face it, we all have issues with some type of sin. Whether it's little white lies or big black lies, or, you can run the gamut. You go on, and God makes a promise to Abram that he is going to bless him, and that all nations, we believe, will be blessed through, obviously, the pointing to Christ. All right? When you get to Deuteronomy 7, verses 6 through 11, Moses makes a statement about Israel. And you got to remember, in Deuteronomy, it's called the second law. Moses or the people of Israel are about, under Joshua's leadership, to go in and take over the promised land. But the generation that he's talking to, or Moses is talking to in Deuteronomy, is not the one that came out of Egypt. Remember, all those 20 years and above died in the wilderness because of their unbelief. So we're talking about their kids, grandkids, great-grandkids. So they did not see the great works that God did in bringing the Israel out of Egypt. They just heard about it. And so Moses is impressing upon them the law, the covenant, the relationship that they have with him. And in Deuteronomy 7 verse 6, he says, "For you are a people holy to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for his treasured possession out of all the peoples who are on the face of the earth. It is not because you were more in number than any other people that the Lord set his love on you and chose you, for you were the fewest of all people. But it's because the Lord loves you and is keeping the oath that he swore to your fathers, that the Lord has brought you out with a mighty hand, redeemed you from the house of slavery, from the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Now therefore the Lord your God is God, the faithful God, who keeps covenant and steadfast love with those who love him and keep his commandments to 1,000 generations, and repays to their face those who hate him by destroying them. He will not be slack with one who hates him, he will repay him face. You shall therefore be careful to do the commandment, the statutes, and the rules that I commanded you today." And then he goes on talking again about the law and the things that are there. So again, God shows that Israel was chosen because they were what? The least. And God working through him, by the time you get to the prophets and the kings in particular, shows that he is God. And the example of being God's people and God blessing them for obeying him was what stands out throughout the whole book of Kings and Chronicles, because over and over again, when they go in and take the promised land, God would, win the battles, Jericho, go through all the things that are there. And as they defeat people, God's name becomes known not just to Israel, but to all those people around that God was driving out of Israel, or the land of Canaan that became Israel. So God was making a name for himself, and there are times when a nation would come up to go against Israel, and they would remember what God did to another nation and drove them out, and they would back off, because the God of Israel was a saving God. So, that sanctity of being God's people was an illustration of what we live in today and what the people of Malachi's time was. You keep God's commandments, you have that covenant relationship, God will bless you beyond everything. And that's a testimony of God's faithfulness and his blessings for being his people. Of course, Paul talks in Romans how a true Jew is one now that is one innerly, not circumcision of the flesh, but circumcision of the heart and the spirit. Now, having said all that, when you get to 1 Samuel, you have the beginning of the people wanting a king. Why did they want a king?
Because the other nations had king.
Excuse me?
Because the other nation had a king.
Yeah, because other nations. If you read 1 Samuel 8 and verse 5, it says, they tell Samuel, hey, you're old, you're not going to be around much longer, so give us a king that we may be like other nations. They didn't want to be distinct anymore. They wanted to be like everyone else. Goes against what God said back in Deuteronomy. I chose you to make you my people. And when you try to be like everybody else, guess what? You fall into the category of not being God's people. And if you're not being God's people, then why should God bless you? Now, when you keep reading, you get the kings, kingdoms after Solomon, the richest king. Queen of Sheba was amazed at all the stuff she'd heard, and when she actually came and saw it, she said, man, that's not even a half of what the reality is. So she's flabbergasted. And Solomon gives her everything she asked for and all the wisdom, and It talks about how the nations came to Solomon to seek his wisdom. Again, God working his will, not just among the people of Israel, but other nations. And as things wind up, Rehoboam becomes king upon Solomon's death. Rehoboam's a young man, listens to counsel of the old man, then he listens to the counsel of the young man, people his age, he chose that. He increased the taxes on the people of Israel. Jeroboam and the 10 tribes, went north, started a whole new kingdom of Israel, and you had the tribe and a half of Judah as being the southern kingdom. Jeroboam did what? What's the first thing he did to establish his kingdom?
Put up idols.
Yeah, he set up 2 altars, one at Dan, one at Bethel, made golden calves so that the people wouldn't go to Jerusalem and maybe stay there. They would stay in, the northern kingdom, and Jeroboam be their king. So he kind of coddled people into, he made his own priesthood and everything. But what did those 2 calves supposed to represent? I think it's an important point. Was Jeroboam in his mind worshiping other gods? I don't think so. He set up the golden calf to represent Jehovah just in his part of the world. And it's odd to me, well, not odd, I guess, really kind of something. Where did we find another golden calf before these 2?
After Moses.
Yeah, Mount Sinai, when Moses went up to get the law. The golden calf, what? That's an Egyptian god. They'd been in Egypt for a long time, so they just kind of, assimilated that. Jeroboam seems to remind that, brings it back up. God doesn't do well with Jeroboam. The northern kingdom of Israel had 13 kings. Every one of them, without fail, when it talks about Jeroboam begat so-and-so, and his son, when he died, so-and-so became king and did evil in the sight of the Lord. Over and over, 13 times. And he finally sends in the Assyrians, Sennacherib, carries them off captivity, and then Israel tribe of Judah does pretty good. They start following the example of Jeroboam. You finally get to Hezekiah, probably the best king after David and Solomon that Judah had. He makes a lot of reforms. His son Josiah follows suit, but not quite. They leave the high places. And then when Josiah dies, you have a couple more kings that do evil in the sight of the Lord. So God sends in what? Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonians, carries them off. 70 years captivity, they come back. And that's about the time you run into the minor prophets and Malachi. Malachi is unique in that he is the last prophet in the Old Testament. He probably prophesied, near as they can figure, somewhere between 443 and 438 BC. The reason they chose that date is because the conditions that Nehemiah and Ezra talk about in their books mirror the conditions that Malachi describes. And that's laxity, perversion of the sacrifices, marriage and divorce, a number of things that Malachi deals with. Same circumstances that you find particularly in the 13, 14 chapters of Nehemiah, 2nd, 3rd chapters of the book of Ezra. The temple, if you remember, Ezra and Nehemiah were crucial in the rebuilding of Jerusalem after the captivity. Those that came back under the decrees of Cyrus, the king of Persia, sent money to build the walls and the temple temple was completed somewhere around 536 BC. But if you go back and read again in the prophets, what was the reaction of those people that were still alive that had seen Solomon's temple when they saw the second temple?
They cried.
Yeah, they cried. Not for joy, because this temple's smaller, doesn't have all the elaborate gold and everything that Solomon's temple did, and the walls were still being rebuilt, and they were having all this problem with the people that had taken over the land during the captivity, were giving them trouble. You know, you have the story of Sanballat, a bunch of other people giving them fits. So when you get to Malachi's time, you have the walls being rebuilt, you have the temple rebuilt, you have basically a orthodox following of the Jews of the law. Idolatry was still there, but not prominent like it had been during the times of the kings. God's chastisement, the Assyrian, the Babylonian captivities, did their thing. People realized, and those that came back to Jerusalem, you know, began to recognize God. But it was more outward than inward. And so, when you get to Malachi, one of the things that you find a little bit with, if you want to say, some arguments about Malachi is his name. The word Malachi literally means messenger, or my messenger. A lot of commentaries believe that Malachi is a shortened form of Malachiah, which would mean the messenger of Jehovah. Some commentators don't think it's a name, they think it's just a title. The word messenger in Greek is the same as angel. So you get some weird things sometimes in some of the commentaries about the angel of the Lord. But anyway, if Malachi is a name, which the majority of commentators believe it is, because almost all the prophets begin with the name of the prophet. So it'd be kind of out of context, if you want to say, compared to the other prophets, if it's not a name or just a title. Really doesn't make a lot of difference. I think it is his name, and when you look at Malachi, again, if you compare it to Nehemiah 13, 14, 16, Ezra 2 and 3, you find a lot of those same conditions going on within the people of Israel. They were doing all, again, the mechanics of being the people of God, but with a great deal of apathy. So if you want to say the major thing that Malachi does is deal with or attacking the apathy of the people. And that apathy was showing up in the way they were sacrificing, the way they were worshiping, marriage and divorce. There was a lot of, during the times of Malachi and Ezra, after the captivity, of people throwing off their Hebrew wives and marrying an idolater, people of the land. There was laxity in the priesthood, was really corrupt. And so a lot of what the people were being taught was a corruption that the Levites brought into the worship. So again, just not much going on. If you look at Merriam-Webster, the word apathy doesn't appear in Malachi. Now, that's just a good word to describe the conditions. And Webster defines it as the release or freedom from passion, excitement, or emotion. The absence or lack of emotion or feeling. Indifference, listlessness. So the people were just kind of You know, we'll go through the motion. We're still offering sacrifices even though they're polluted, one of the charges that he gives. And they just go about their daily business. Really didn't care. They were just, you know, if you go back to Haggai and Zechariah, you have the prophecies about the rebuilding of the temple, and you kind of have these real dreamy conditions that should have existed. And the people weren't experiencing that. They didn't see that. They didn't realize they were the cause of it, but they didn't see it, so they didn't feel it. So you just kind of, you know, muddle through, make the best of what you got, but they did it in their own way. There was no real love for God, no real desire to fulfill what God had put out. And so as the people began to deal with the corruption that the priests were teaching them, obviously God was not happy. And so Malachi basically divides itself into 6, well, some of the commentators say dispositions, they got all kinds of words, 6 problems. And Malachi is not like, again, other minor prophets or any of even the major prophets in the way he presents his arguments. He does it in a 3-point deal. Number 1, and this is obviously God doing the talking, not just the prophet. He'll say, you got a problem here, you know. We'll say the deal's about the marriage to idolaters. And the people respond, the second part is, but you say, a very common phrase throughout the book of Malachi. God says this, you say it's this way, and then the third part is, bam, the answer is given. And the call to obedience, the call to faithfulness, all comes out. The cool thing about Malachi is, when he finishes his prophecy, again, say we'll just use 438. I mean, that's the newest, latest part that some say he wrote it. From there till the coming of Christ, those 400 years, we call them the silent 400 years, because what? We don't see God speaking. Has God ever quit speaking to man? He started in the garden. The apostles obviously were moved by the Spirit. So when has God not ever spoken to man? How does he speak to us today? Yeah, the Bible. And what else?
Spirit.
Spirit.
Us.
And us.
We're God's people, right? If we're God's people, we're talking about God. We demonstrate God. We, like the Israelites did in the old law, showed God's kindness, blessings, severeness, reproof, correction, instruction, and righteousness. Man of God may be complete, thoroughly furnished every good work. We're an example. We're a walking Bible. And we better be a talking Bible. Same thing, when you look at those 400 silent years, you have all the apocryphal literature that was produced, all kinds of gospels, Bel and the Dragon. I mean, some weird stuff. If you ever get to read some of it, it's fun. Doesn't sound like Bible at all. The copy I had, I don't think I have it anymore, was, if you read it, it was written like King James. So you just fit right into it, But the stories were crazy. All the things he did when Christ was a kid, miracles he did. I mean, it's possible, but the way it's written, I don't think it's believable. But anyway, you had all that going on. But you still have what? Israel looking for the coming Messiah. The thing that Malachi does is pretty much what you find in the opening of the Gospels. You know, John the Baptist was going to be the forerunner of Christ, the one that introduced the things of Christ in his generation. Malachi pretty much introduces you to John. So for 400 years, the Jews are looking for the Messiah. They're looking for this prophet that is going to bring in the fulfillment and the coming of the kingdom of God. Now, obviously, a lot of their thinking was not correct, because they were looking at it, a lot of them were looking at an earthly kingdom. And if you read the history of that 400-year period before Christ came, you have people claiming to be the Christ. You have people rising up, because as you get towards the end of that 400 years, Rome now, instead of the Greek Empire, is the big wig. So people were trying to throw off Roman rule, because Judah, at the time that Malachi wrote, was probably 20 by 30 miles, 600 square miles. You look at the borders under David as he began to run the people out of Israel that God told him to, and their borders went from almost to Egypt, way up north, and away east. A lot more than 600 square miles. So Judah had become compacted after the Babylonian and the Assyrian captivities to very little. And they were again subject to the Persian Empire, which was kind of friendly towards them. Again, Cyrus paid for a lot of the reconstruction of the temple. He brought the things that Nebuchadnezzar had put in the Babylonian treasury when the temple was first destroyed, and brought them back. Now, obviously not everything, but still, some of the utensils from the original temple were now in the second temple. But again, it's smaller, shabby compared to Solomon's temple. And what was missing in the reconstructed temple?
The ark.
Anybody know?
What was it like? What did you say?
When Solomon built the temple that David had envisioned, and God said, "You can't, your son will," what happened when they brought the ark into the temple that Solomon built and put it between the giant cherubim that were in the Holy of Holies?
God's presence showed up.
Yeah, God filled it with the smoke and his presence. It says the priests couldn't go in, even in and minister, because of the presence of God. Don't find that in the second temple. God was still there, but the people didn't see it like they did before. A lot of it, again, the apathy, their attitude. They're looking at this little piece of land that they have now as the people of God, and they're still subservient at that point, the beginning, to the Persians. Later to what? Alexander and the Grecian Empire, and then finally to Rome by the time or before Christ came. So their whole viewpoint is, again, pretty dark. Even though, again, idolatry had pretty much gone down to if you want to say, a minimalist degree, their worship was just not exciting. And besides the priests perverting the things of God, it was even worse. Now, think about that for a little bit. If you can, go ahead.
They were lukewarm.
Yeah, lukewarm. Yeah, very much so. Kind of wanting to be like the world and yet separate from the world, and yet God chose them to be totally separate. 2 Corinthians 6. Paul tells us we need, to be separate from the world. We are to stand out from the world and not like when they wanted the king to be like other people. Why do we want to be like other people? What's the benefit?
You will be accepted.
Huh?
You want to be accepted.
Yeah, we're just accepted. You don't have people pointing fingers at you. You don't have people saying, man, look at them. Them Jews think they're the only ones in the world. What was Jonah's reaction when God told him to go to Nineveh? Are you sick? I just imagine him talking to God. Are you crazy? They're not God's people. You're our God. If I go and tell them to repent, they'll do it. And guess what? When he finally did, what happened? They did it. Was Jonah happy? No. He goes up on a hill. Okay, God, change your mind. Come on, zap. Burn them. Crispy critter. Deep fry them. They don't deserve you. We need different at times. Maybe not quite that blatant. But when you look at Malachi and the period he wrote in and the things he talks about, it was to a people that were doing at least part of what he said, and yet not enough to be so separate from everybody else that people looked at you as being weird. Weird's a good thing.
Don, so why did the Lord allow this 400 years?
I think it was, when you look at, again, Malachi's encouragements and his directions, the arguments he gives about what was going on in Israel or Judah at that time. The promise for the Messiah was in God's timing, which is never like ours. Paul says, in due time, God sent forth his son. Well, from the beginning of the world to when he came is, 5, 6, 7,000, I don't know how many thousand years you want to look at. Use Cardinal Usher's date that creation was in 4,000 whatever BC, then you have 4,000 years before Christ came into the world. Why did God wait that long? What was his purpose again in choosing Israel? To reveal himself in a way that says we need him. In other words, basically to show us, as the Bible points out, we can't do it on our own. Not with that man that directs us on the steps, there's a way that seems right up to a man, at the end thereof is death, Proverbs 16. We're helpless. We think, we do have smarts. There's no doubt about that. God gave us dominion. We have power over the world. How do we know that? Besides him telling us that. Look at how far technology has come now, and it's, even in my lifetime, and I'm 76, so I haven't been around a whole long time, but long enough to see us go from the post-war era and look at walking on the moon, and then from that time, the 60s to now, it's just exponential, the difference in what we're doing. Space, medicine, think of all the stuff we do. Some of it's good, some of it's turned out to be a little screwy, but hey, that's us. We're a little screwy, whether we want to admit it or not. So, in God bringing Christ to the world to fulfill the promise he gave to Abram back way, way long ago, he's educating us. We have a history of a God who talks to us, deals with us, corrects us, instructs us, punishes us for our good. What's our normal response to God as a human race?
People don't like correction.
Yeah, we don't like it. I mean, think of yourself as a little kid. When your parents said, don't do that, and they give you the reason, and you go and do it anyway. And they come back and punish you. Didn't I tell you not to do that? I mean, I heard that a lot. Oh, I hate to admit that. I did. My parents would always tell me before I got the whomping or whatever it was, didn't I tell you? Well, how many times when you look at the history of man has God said, didn't I tell you? I mean, back in Deuteronomy, Moses said, you guys are going to go away from God, and God is going to scatter you among the nations. He told them about the Babylonian and the Assyrian captivities centuries before it took place. It wasn't like they were that stupid not to know. But just like Adam and Eve, just like Cain and Abel, just like us today, we don't always listen because we don't like to be told what to do. We think what?
We know.
We know. And God has shown us over and over again, what we think we know is a way into death. So, as far as why we had that 400 years, when you get to the time that John appears, what were some of the questions they were asking John?
Are you the Messiah?
Yeah. Are you the Christ? Are you a prophet? Are you this? Are you that? They were looking for it. Again, when you look at the history of Israel, the times that they had rebellions rise up trying to throw off whatever government it was there, because they thought they ought to be the nation. And so you had false prophets, you had false Christs, you had leaders that were just trying to be politically free, rise up, and the powers that be crushed them almost every time. There were a few high points where Israel kind of regained a little of its freedom, and then again, by the time Rome came, that was a pipe dream. It wasn't going to happen. Not the way that they were looking at it. So Malachi starts in chapter 1, the first, if you want to say, conflict God has with them, has to deal with the idea of the reality of God's elective love for Israel. In other words, the people were saying, you don't love us. God says, yeah, I do, and here's why. That's the first thing he talks about. In chapter 1, in beginning of verse 6, going through about the end or the middle of chapter 2, he starts talking to the priests and about their inadequacies and the things they were doing. When you get to the middle of chapter chapter 2, you have the deal about the marriage to idolaters. When you get to the end of chapter 2, you have a disposition where he winds it from the priest to the whole nation and the promise that God had given to Abraham. When you get to the 3rd chapter, you have Malachi returning to the subject of the offerings that were being given to God according to the law. They were begrudging him. I mean, they didn't really want to do it. And so when they did do it, they were giving the lame and the sick and the dead and whatever, just getting rid of the garbage and keeping the other for themselves. Then in the middle of chapter 3 and the early part of chapter 4, Malachi starts grumbling about the evildoers in the people itself. And then he closes in the 4th chapter. He summarizes everything. The point of the prophecy is that the law of Moses needed to be remembered and followed. That's basically the 6 ways that God, through Malachi, deals with the situation during the time of Malachi. He didn't put the clock back up, so I know where I'm at. I got about 4 minutes. This is going to be good. So, when you look at everything that was going on, you have promises in the end of Malachi of the restoration, the coming again of the one who would set things right, in some ways pointing to John, more specifically pointing to Christ. So Malachi is an important book. He's a lot, really, if you want to take it down to the basics, he's like the book of James. Here's some practical things you need to do to be right with God. And then the big message, faith, obedience to God, love for God, is shown by our works. How we live, what we do. And that's basically what Malachi is telling the people of Israel. You guys are saying one thing, and God's telling you this, do it. You know, it's not enough to just kind of say, oh, I'm a Jew, I can show my birth date, back to Moses or Abram. That don't matter. It's where your heart is, where your life, what direction you're taking, and again, that problem of what runs my life, me or God. In John the 4th chapter, get over here. John 4, now, go back to verse 31. He says, this is Christ. Meanwhile, the disciples were urging him, saying, Rabbi, eat. But he said to them, I have food to eat you do not know about. So the disciples said to one another, has anyone brought him something to eat? Jesus said, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his work. That's what Christ said was his food. That was his purpose. You see that specifically, that conflict between possible sin and doing the will of God in the Garden of Gethsemane. Father, if it's possible, what? I don't want to do this. Because here is a man in every respect, knowing he was going to be scourged and crucified. I don't know if anybody in his right mind would want to go there. There's the conflict. How do you take charge of that sin? Not my will, but thy will be done. Not just in word, but in deed. Because he went to the cross. When the guards came to take Christ to be crucified, or at least take him to all the trials and the mock things that wound up with the crucifixion, what did one of the disciples, namely Peter, do? Yeah, pulls out a sword. Yeah, whack. He's going to defend him. What did Christ tell him?
Live by the sword, you'll die.
Yeah, put your sword up. It's my time. The man, I don't want to do it, overrode that with the power of God. I'm going to do it. That's what I'm here for. Are we any different? The answer is no. We have the same situation each and every day we live. When we do something we know is wrong, we're doing it because we want to. And we're putting God to the side. That's sin. How can we overcome that? Confess those sins. God's faithful and just to forgive us, 1 John 4, and we're good again. When God looks at us, we're what? Holy, blameless children of God, heirs of the promise. That's what Malachi was telling people of Israel. I won't be here next week. I'm going to be in Texas. I'm going to be in really warm space. And we'll talk a little bit more, there's a couple more introductory things I want to deal with Malachi, but then we'll get in and we'll just do a nice little look at those 6 aspects of disputations. And just as we look at each one, put yourself there, because we fit in every one of them at some point, to some degree. And we have to deal with them. So that sin doesn't take charge of our life, we take charge of it. So, I'm through. I think I'm over, actually. Yeah, I am.